Hello friends, so today I'll be talking on this 13th journal update. So this topic I'll be talking would be on tele ICU in general, and the reason I'm giving this talk is because we are doing tele rounds for 11 district hospitals from our hospital. So I thought it is important to understand what how we go about with tele ICU and what we understand would be the components of tele ICU and how is this tele rounds that we have been doing for 11 districts over last 4 weeks. So how is it that we have been doing? So I thought it's good to touch base on the basic tenets of this telemedicine. This cartoon, if you see, it is quite explanatory of what tele ICU means. So if you see, this is an off-site person, so he's not in the water. So obviously he is sitting outside, and this is an on-site person who is in trouble, and basically there is a communication happening with a off-site person to an on-site person to have solutions to come out of the crisis through audio-visual means. So I think this figure pretty much summarily explains to you as to how tele-ICU. So there is an off-site people who are helping the on-site people to evade and mitigate the crisis situation and improve the outcomes by using audio-visual aids, which could be satellite-based or through internet or web-based. So this is what the whole concept of tele-ICU would be. So most of my talk comes from this review article, albeit I should say it is a old article, but this comprehensively covers the basic tenets of the whole tele ICU. So my first half of the talk would be uh, very specifically about the basic dimensions of tele ICU, what it is all about. The second aspect is about the role of tele ICU in COVID specific situation, and there was a letter to editor that had come out from US group which is doing tele ICU in COVID patients, and the way we have been doing it in Karnataka. So that would be the contents of my talk. So if you look at the tele ICU as a practice that has been significantly increasing, if you see, it started somewhere from 2002 and it has been only exponentially increasing with the number of beds that are being catered by tele ICU services. So although I have to say these are old statistics, in 2009 already there were 4,900 US beds which was connected to tele ICU, and there were 1 million patients which were monitored until then. So, which is a staggering number by then. So, I'm sure this would have increased many fold by now. So, this is just a representation of how the off-site center looks. So, you will see a doctor or a specialist sitting with various monitors in front of him. So, these monitors could be relaying the patient specific information, monitored variables, investigative modalities, and the decision trees that he would be following. And this basically what this helps in achieving is re-engineering the care processes involved in the off-site center. So off-site center may be utilizing some methodologies to cater care, so they would be re-engineering the care processes and enhancing and catalyzing the whole process to enhance and optimize good outcomes in a patient, with a hope that it reduces mortality of the patients, and with a hope that it reduces the length of stay and reduces the cost for the patient. So that has been the basic aim of telemedicine. But now the question that would arise in each one of you is, how effective has tele ICU been so far in achieving this result of reducing mortality and reducing cost? How effective it has been in re-engineering the care processes to influence the outcomes? So that is the question that we need to answer. So we clearly understand, friends, the whole concept, the ethos of ICU is integrating our clinical variables. So whatever we examine in a patient, we collate the clinical findings and we integrate this with the whatever we see on the monitored variables, which can be on the monitor or which could be on the ventilatory variables or which could be with other ancillary tools or machines attached to the patient. So we capture this information, and the third important domain of information we capture is all the investigative modalities, which could be all the blood reports and the imaging reports and other ancillary sort of investigations like EEG, ECG, echocardiogram. So the whole ethos of intensive care is constantly integrating this clinical information, monitored variables, and investigative modalities. We integrate all these three and ascertain what the overriding problems are and plan the treatment. So this remains the core essence of any intensive care management, and this precisely applies even to tele-ICU, where constantly we are integrating information about the clinical status by the webcam or the video attached to the patient, and all these monitored variables and the ventilatory variables are synced in a way that these variables are captured remotely in an offsite, and all the investigations get virtually transmitted to the offsite center, and the intensivist who is sitting there is integrating these three information and formulating the diagnostic plan and the treatment. So how do we assess the success of the program? So the, the way we assess the success of the program is basically they have looked at two primary parameters as indicative of whether tele ICU has been successful, to look at standardized mortality rate and length of stay prior to beginning of tele ICU, and after the tele ICU services has been initiated, they look at how whether it has had an influence on reducing the SMR and reducing the length of stay. So I will show you all the evidence done so far. So all these studies have looked at these two primary endpoints as the result of what tele-ICU has achieved, whether it has been having any impact on these favorable outcomes. So when you look at evidence, so there are around 6 studies that I have collated. So if you look, all these studies have come from US. So which again re-emphasizes that possibly US was at the forefront of establishing this tele-ICU. See this Rosenfeld et al. So they looked at tele-ICU and its impact on patient. They found there was a 45% reduction in mortality, 30% reduction in length of stay. So obviously if you reduce your length of stay, it has a association or correlation by reducing the cost by 16%. So this was the study. So this was the Cole et al. Again come from US. So this study showed 5% reduction in mortality, and there was a median reduction of length of stay by 1.8 days, and there was a 25% reduction in the cost. As I said, the endpoints for tele-ICU has always been length of stay, mortality, and the costing. And Howell et al., again a US study, which showed the length of stay was reduced to from 1.18 to 0.96 as a difference, and standardized mortality rate also was brought down with tele-ICU. This was another US study by Dickhouse et al., where they showed the length of stay is reduced by 17%. This was all our US studies. So Breslov et al. Showed there was a reduction of length of stay by 16%. There was a cost reduction by 25%, and they were all statistically significant. This was another study, Schaffer et al. This is the last study, which again showed that this showed an additional finding of reducing the occurrence of cardiac arrest. So which means they tried to identify the trends which could possibly lead to bad outcome, take steps or intervene to prevent down spiraling to cause cardiac arrest. So they could prevent cardiac arrest also is another positive finding of tele-ICU. So this was another study which came in critical care medicine to see whether it had any impact on sepsis patients. So what they found is so tele-ICU significantly reduced the mortality in sepsis patients by incorporating the best practice guidelines by adopting early goal directed. Now I know we would debate on EGDT, but this publication which happened in 2006 demonstrated by incorporating teleservices, what they could achieve is to incorporate in a robust way the best practice of early goal directed therapy, which means there is a re-emphasis on adopting these protocols in a more streamlined or more regimental way, because there are additional eyes which are overseeing whether these protocols are incorporated, and it improved the adherence to these protocols, and it improved adherence to best protocol guidelines, so best practice guidelines. And what were the best practice guidelines? They saw by incorporating teleservices, it helped in achieving your protocols or best practice guidelines to reduce the VAP rates, and to reduce the occurrence of DVT rate, and to reduce the stress ulcer, and to reduce the glucose levels. So basically these are all the quality markers which every ICU should subscribe to. So what tele-ICU achieved in this particular manuscript was that it re-emphasized the adoption of these best practice guidelines so that the end outcome of all these deleterious outcomes were reduced significantly. And this is the statistics. So when they adopted the best practice guidelines in tele-ICU was adopted in 202, when they looked at 95% of the time, these best practice guidelines were incorporated in the care of the patient. But in a group 220 patients where there was no tele-ICU, the adherence rate was only 75%. That was statistically significant. I think for this we don't need a rocket science to understand this, because there are two extra eyes, or there's an extra unbiased group who is overseeing one's performance in ICU. Obviously, the adoption of these protocols become a lot more, foolproof, and there wouldn't be too much of deviation from adopting these protocols. So that's what one could subscribe. So this was another Canadian study which again looked at before EICU and after tele-ICU in surgical patients, and they saw the unscheduled admission to surgical ICU was minimized by adopting tele-ICU. And here also you can see the mortality was significantly reduced after adopting tele-ICU services, and that was statistically significant. So this was another study from US, effect of telemedicine on mortality and length of stay. Again here they showed post tele-ICU, the length of the mortality was significantly reduced, and your hospital mortality also was reduced, ICU length of stay also was reduced, and hospital length of stay also was reduced. So all these were statistically significant. So basically this is a general overview to re-emphasize that tele-ICU has a role to play in an intensive care where there may not be adequately staffed, or there may not be a qualified intensivist. It can possibly make a difference. And again the authors subscribe the degree of benefit of tele-ICU is directly proportional to the degree of acceptance at the on-site center. Suppose we offer tele-ICU to a place and there is a barrier for them to accept this as a science, then the success will not happen, because whatever suggestions and recommendations the off-site people do, if it is not adopted and implemented and executed, then obviously it will not lead to any favorable outcome. And so there should be acceptance of the inputs, and there should be an acceptance to change the processes or the workflow patterns. That's what I said. It's a re-engineering the care process should happen as suggested by the off-site in the best interest of the patient. If that happens, definitely the success has been proven with tele-ICU. So now let's look into off-site. What do you mean by off-site support team? So off-site support team typically requires the presence of intensivist full-time and presence of trained ICU nurse. And the primary responsibility of an ICU nurse and an ICU specialist in the off-site center is to keep a tab on early identification of signs which may lead to a sentinel event, and take necessary steps or interventions to prevent the sentinel event. So as soon as they identify any alarms or markers which could potentially lead to a sentinel event, so it is communicated to the on-site person in a way that it is acceptable to him. So throughout this whole manuscript, there is a re-emphasis on the way things are communicated to the on-site personnel, and on-site personnel is mandated to take necessary steps to prevent the sentinel event. And there is an emphasis from the off-site people to the on-site healthcare provider to adhere to the always best practice guideline. So throughout the manuscript, there is a re-emphasis on sharing of knowledge that keeps happening from off-site to on-site, and a re-emphasis on adopting the best practice guidelines as a baseline so that the care is optimal to the patients. And all these two together, by preventing a sentinel event in occurring and by incorporating best practice guidelines, so the length of stay could be minimized and the overall cost to the patient also would be minimized. And it is emphasized again in this manuscript, the successful telemedicine or teleservices would really depend on the maturity and the seniority of the personnel present in the offsite. So it is emphasized at multiple places about the need for having a senior, mature, qualified intensivist off-site, and it is also mentioned very clearly that the off-site personnel who are catering to the tele ICU should also be involved in on-site care of the patients in the part or in the geographical location wherever they're practicing. What that means is the team which is catering the tele ICU services should have a onerous responsibility of looking after a patient in a specified place on site, which means they need to be having the clinical skills that is being imparted on site, and they should be doing this off site. So what I could understand from that is, so the team should not be very restrictive to only telework and who have no role to play in any ICU on site. So this is a very clearly mentioned in this manuscript. Again, it goes on to show it. The reason why this is echoed in this paper is, if suppose you are only confined to a room and doing teleservices, and you're not really exposed to the literal world where the real time life experiences happen when you're communicating with the patient, or when you're dealing with the real life patient, with regards to the the resource availability, with regards to the care plan that you plan with interdisciplinary meets, then there may be some dichotomy in certain decisions that one makes when someone is confined only to off-site and not really on-site activity. So that is what it is emphasized. So I think this was something which came to me as something different. So I think what we can subscribe to is the team should have both on-site and off-site responsibilities. So they should not be only be confined to tele ICU services. So the team, whichever is providing the tele ICU, should also be running an ICU. Literally, should also be running ICU. So which means, suppose in a month, so they do 3 weeks on site, which means they're doing real ICU work, talking to the patient, examining the patient, doing the rounds, and maybe 1 week one of the team members should do telemedicine. It should not be like a person is only sitting in four walls and doing tele ICU work and not involved with a real ICU patient care on the bedside. So this is what I could decipher, and this has been emphasized at least in a couple of places in this manuscript. And whatever decisions that one is making should be in accordance with the laws that are prevailing in the land, and the medico legal issues have to be taken care of whilst making any decision, because the liability lies with both on-site and off-site personnel involved in the care of the patient. So this has to be made very clear that the teleservices cannot absolve of their responsibility on suggestions or recommendations or interventions suggested or made. And the reason for that is the interventions would be therapeutic in nature, which means administering a drug. And suppose administering a drug has led to serious side effects, and if that is looked into from medico legal parlance, the liability would vest with both on-site and off-site personnel. And the interventions could be in the form of establishing diagnosis, and the interventions could be in the form of management, like mechanical ventilation, tweaking of mechanical ventilation, or determining the modes of ventilation, determining the weaning of ventilation, or the need for dialysis. And time and again it's emphasized that off-site personnel have onerous responsibility, and it's a continuum of sharing of knowledge. So which means it is not transactional. So the off-site person is not only giving them orders, but whatever is suggested to the on-site person, there is a rationale and reasoning that is documented, and there is an educative process happening, there is an imparting of knowledge that is happening, and there is a transformation in the on-site person also. So this is something we have to constantly bear in mind with any team that is delivering tele ICU. So what does off-site support team? When I say support team, it's a non-clinical staff. So these are all clerical work. So so it is said that maximum effectiveness has to be achieved from these non-clinical staff in documenting and looking into the processes that revolve in executing this tele ICU. And there is a emphasis on off-site support team is all the audio visual people who look after audio visual. Their role becomes terribly important. So typically tele ICU would look like this. So we did a tele ICU services for Mysore Columbia Asia for 6 months, and district hospital in Tumkur as a project for the government for around 6 months, a few years back. So Cary is our hospital. This is a Mysore Columbia Asia. So obviously we use audio-visual aids, and these monitors are connected to the monitor on the remote site in a virtual way. And I will show you how we did it. So basically there should not be any glitches in these four dimensions. So there should not be glitches in your connectivity, and there should not be glitches in the relay of information to the offsite sensor, because there should not be a lag time, or there should not be a interval, there should not be a lag between what is happening on site and what people are seeing in the off site. And there should not be glitches in the audio visual clarity, because that also may influence some erroneous judgment. And it has been found that the physicians would have a very low tolerance if there are some glitches, because their interest in continuing the care or following up on trends would be affected because of glitches in these audiovisual aids. So that's why the need for the support team, the constant presence of IT team and the audiovisual team to take care of these glitches is very important. That has been emphasized, because the clinicians are under duress, and there will be low tolerance if there is lot of mishaps in these audiovisual. And the important benefits is of non-clinical staff, as I already mentioned, is to make sure there is a seamless communication that is happening with regards to access to the processes, access to the information that is coming, and access to the outcomes that are happening. So that this should be seamless, and that becomes the responsibility of non-clinical staff. So this is the pictures of tele-ICU that our team did. Me and Karthik were running tele-ICU services for Mysore Columbia Asia and District Hospital Tumkur, and now we are doing, I won't call what we are doing now for government as tele ICU, we are doing tele rounds. So I'll tell what the difference is. So this was our console. So we used to sit here, and these were the remote monitoring. So basically for tele ICU, when we did, I would say this is not advanced, but I'm sure there are more advanced commercial versions. So what we had was, we had three monitors. So one monitor will virtually relay all the monitored variables that is happening, that is connected to a patient in a remote site, be it Mysore or Tumkur. And then we had one monitor which was conveying all the investigative variables from the offsite. And then we had a webcam monitor which used to monitor the patient, and where we could communicate with the patient. Um, and the program we were using was Care 21 to relay the information. And it is emphasized that the skill of the offsite personnel is very much essential in leveraging the available resources. So you cannot have a perfect model. So how we innovate and how we leverage from the available resources to achieve best possible outcome to the patient is what is important. So there should be some innovation that needs to happen with whatever that is available, to capture all those information that we need to make a to establish a diagnosis and influence good outcome. And the accuracy of info also is very important. So if you have lag time in the information being conveyed, then the decisions made also will have some sort of a dichotomy, and that may lead to adverse outcomes. Accuracy of info is very important. Whatever is being relayed to the offsite should be accurate information, because you would be acting on information what you get, and if there is some errors in that, so that would lead to miscalculated interventions. So this was the whatever cursory tele work we used to do. So this was being relayed from Mysore. So we used to see all the monitored variables on one screen, and we used to see all the investigating variables of x-rays, imaging, and investigations. And this was another computer which we used to connect to the webcam, and that used to relay the patient patient, and we could communicate with patient, we could counsel with the patient family through the webcam. So this was our tele ICU console when we did for Mysore and Tumkur District Hospital. So now we are not doing this, so I'm sure things are advanced. So I'm just giving an overview. So things may be advanced, but the essence of tele ICU is this: capturing all the information. Basically, you have to capture each and every information that you would otherwise do in your real time rounds, and get it off-site, so that you integrate all that, and some uh, decision on diagnosis and interventions and management would be happening. So as you see, again another picture where I'm sitting and looking into the monitor. So this was, I would say, at least 4 to 5 years back we did this. Okay, now coming to the third domain of tele ICU, this is very important: program integration and acceptance. As I said, the degree of success in tele ICU is directly proportional to the acceptance of on-site people, because if on-site people are not syncing to the wavelength of off-site, then the program will fall in place. So, and it is emphasized that the acceptance is greater when the best practice guidelines that you have imparted to the on-site is accepted, incorporated, implemented, and followed. So then only we can have a good, successful outcome. And absolutely good communication and coordination should happen between on-site and off-site medical care personnel round the clock. So this is not an one-off communication. So this communication should be a continuum of process. There's something called social learning theory, which has been mentioned in this manuscript. So what they mean by social learning theory is constantly the off-site personnel should make sure that the on-site healthcare workers are constantly engaged in the decision making that is happening for the patient, and there is some empowerment of the on-site people that should be happening to help them make decision. So that is social learning. So again, what you could decipher from this is it should not be an autocratic way where the offsite people just tell them do this. It should not be transactional where you tell them to do something but you don't reason out as to why you differ in the opinion. Rather, it should be transformational. So you explain to them as to why you are suggesting this. So there is a constant learning that is happening as and when suggestions are being made, so that there is a transformation that is happening on site and they are involved in the decision making. That involvement or engaging them in the decision making has to happen for tele services to be successful, and that is called as social learning therapy. And how much autonomy you would give for the on-site people to make decision, again that evolves with time, after ascertaining how much they are aligning to the thought process of the off-site people and how much they are aligned to the best practice guidelines that you have imparted to them. So that is the gist of this program integration and acceptance. Okay, so this is a table which I will show in detail. If you see if they have looked at statistically as to what was the maximum interventions that were done by tele-ICU. If you see, what is very interesting for me is always the maximum percentage was getting the on-site people to incorporate and adopt best practice adherence. So, so this excited me. So what it emphasizes is basically there is a learning happening. So you are getting the off-site people to understand all the new guidelines or all the new updates. So there is a constant engagement in learning, and that is the maximum intervention that happens in tele-ICU. And the second maximum was comprehensive admission policy. See, in communication also, educational is 14%, followed by communication with bedside physician, which is interpersonal relationship with an on-site. So this remains the crux of tele-ICU. So there is a constant education. There is a flow of education. There is an imparting of education, imparting of skills, training that is happening, and that remains the quintessential aspect which can make tele-ICU get better. The second most important thing is to establish absolutely good interpersonal relationship, get them to sync and align with your wavelength. These are the two important factors which can make tele-ICU very successful. If these two are not achieved, then I don't think tele-ICU is a good thing for any team. So this is a graphical. See, the first 14% is best practice guidelines, and the second thing is admission review, and the third thing was the hemodynamic interventions. The fourth thing is mechanical ventilation, and the fifth 5%. So altering the diagnosis, altering antibiotic treatment related, if you see, it is very minimal, and life saving is 0.6%. So again goes to emphasize, your tele-ICU is not going to dramatically save a life of a person. Tele-ICU is not going to dramatically change the choice of antibiotic, but what it achieves is incorporating the best practice guidelines, good interpersonal relationship, getting them to sync with your or align with your thoughts in caring for the patient and improving outcomes. So I think that is the essence of tele-ICU. And again, in communication also, if you see, the top interventions is educational. So tele-ICU is all about imparting the latest updates, incorporating the guidelines, and re-engineering their care processes, and having a good interpersonal rapport with the physician on site. This becomes quintessential for tele-ICU. So again, to reflect on in tele-ICU, if I am doing tele-ICU, what is it that I am going to be interested in, which is again mentioned in the manuscript, is all the quality indicators. Every intensivist listening to this lecture would know that we are bound by adopting quality indicators, and there are maximum quality indicators in any specialty would be intensive care. We have 120 quality indicators. So your whole tele-ICU will be to make sure that there is incorporation of these quality indicators. So there is a 4 process indicators, which is ICU length of stay, measures to reduce mechanical ventilation, and maintaining good glycemic control, and standardized mortality rate, self-extubation. So these are all the quality indicators which you would constantly oversee and see whether these quality indicators are adopted in your ICU. Again, if you ask me again, what would an intensivist do in tele rounds? So he would make sure that all the good housekeeping measures or quality indicators are put in place. And as you see from this, this seminal article that came, so it is, we all know there are 20 bare minimum quality indicators. Any place that calls itself an ICU should incorporate. So in tele-ICU, we would re-emphasize on this adoption of this 20 quality. What are the 20 quality indicators? We know FASTag. Every intensivist listening to my talk would know what FASTag. So re-emphasize this thing. So any post-surgical patient, whether enteral nutrition is started within 48 hours, whether they're pain-free, whether they're adequately sedated, thromboprophylaxis, glycemic control, head end elevation, simple things. So these are some things which we would adopt. And incorporation of care bundles to reduce VAP rates, and giving aspirin for any patients who has a history of coronary artery disease, and if someone presents with an acute coronary event, early reperfusion. And so these are all 20 quality, having ICP monitoring or evacuating hematoma in a time bound way, reporting of adverse events, report and giving adequate information to the family, and adopting early resuscitation guidelines, and even having a protocol for treatment limitation, end of life, transfusion restrictions, stress ulcer prophylaxis, DVT prophylaxis, emphasis on hand hygiene, and following up on the adherence to the hand hygiene, and looking at what has been the percentage or the benchmarks, has the benchmarks of hand hygiene been achieved. And and another important quality indicators which we all know is 24-hour coverage of intensivists. So this can be absolutely ensured in tele-ICU. Tele-ICU is a 24-hour domain, so there is a 24 hours monitoring by an intensivist that also will sort of subscribe to tele-ICU, and even facilitating organ donation in a brain dead patients. So what I'm trying to say is, as a tele-ICU, as a tele-intensivist, so your onerous responsibility will be to make sure there is incorporation of these 120 quality indicators. And obviously 120 is not feasible, at least bare minimum 20 quality indicators, which is FASTag, along with this pictorial representation. If you adopt, then you know you have done a good service in re-engineering the care process and influencing good outcome to the patient. So that's about my first part of the talk. So the second part of my talk is whether tele-ICU has a role in COVID-19. So the whole premise for talking on tele-ICU came from this one-page letter to editor that came from Srinivasan, who is a tele-intensivist in USA. So as you see, this came in 17th April 2020. In the context of COVID, whether tele-ICU has a role. So what here it is mentioned, again you are using technology which acts as an interface to connect between a qualified, experienced senior intensivist who may have an influence in changing the outcome in a COVID-19 patients. And the second important domain, which I have emphasized time and again, the quintessential responsibility of tele-ICU is to impart knowledge and make the on-site place to adopt to best practice guidelines. So adopting to COVID protocols that a geographic place has created, or any state or any country has created, to get them to adopt to that protocols in a regimental way is an important functionary of tele-ICU. And third more important thing is, where patients are ventilated, there is a direct overseeing of the ventilatory strategies and tweaking of ventilatory strategies. And this has found to make a significant difference in their outcome. So we understand in COVID, the ventilatory strategies are little different. So we have a typical ARTSNet ventilation, and we have a group where ventilatory strategies may be little different and there is a need for prone ventilation. So this is a whole science in itself, and a tele-intensivist can possibly make a difference. And I think what I liked about the mention in this paper, the fourth important pillar which was emphasized is looking at the innovative ways and the flexibility as to how these teleservices can be adopted. So this I like because what again I have to emphasize what we are doing for the government currently is tele round. So it's not complete tele ICU. Tele ICU is a 24-hour continuum of process. What we are doing is tele round. So that I would put it in this armamentarium as innovative way of overseeing the care provision, and even in the tele rounds we can achieve all these three broad principles: incorporation of protocols and tweaking of oxygen delivery services and influencing the care of the patients. So this was the US data, the Srinivasan's paper. So they have done tele ICU work for 1790 COVID patients in USA, and as you see, this is the age distribution. So 70 to 79 years were the most commonly affected. 27.1% of COVID were in 70 to 79, followed by 60 to 69, which again re-emphasizes that elderly patients are more vulnerable for COVID. I mean COVID severity. So what did these people do? Srinivasan's team, they did looked at ventilatory management. So their role was in tweaking the modes of ventilation, which obviously had a bearing on their outcome, and evaluating patients' response to changes in ventilation. So this happened as a continuous process. So they looked at whether how the patients responded from time to the ventilatory strategies they were adopted and the changes in ventilation, and they used simple audio visual aids to ensure that this process was put in place. And they redefined, I think this is also very important. So the with tele ICU they could restructure the workflow. As I said, re-engineering the care processes or restructuring the workflow pattern could be achieved by teleservices, because there is an expert who is constantly guiding them as to how the workflow patterns should happen. And the tele ICU and COVID had a role in cardiac life support. So they do mention about the way we understand is in COVID, the less number of personnel caring for the patient is better. So remotely, you are sitting outside the contaminated area, and if you are able to monitor COVID patients, minimizing the personnel exposure, that could be achieved. And they so the offsite person acted as a code leader. So when there was a cardiac arrest, he would take on the code, like a code blue team. You have a leader, so they would take on the code leadership and guide the resuscitative efforts in the impending arrest or cardiac arrest scenario. And what this ensured is it reduced the number of personnel to enter the space when a cardiac arrest, because they could be guided from an offsite person in a real time way. So that was another important thing. And this paper emphasizes there were always additional pair of eyes that was overseeing the care of the COVID patients, so that the care could be optimized. And these additional eyes were always, as I mentioned in the previous part, that there is an emphasis on having a senior, more experienced, more matured personnel who has a rich experience and who is continually updating to guide them for the off-site person, for the on-site person. So that also has had a good bearing on influencing outcome in COVID patients. And another thing they emphasize is, because you are minimizing the number of personnel caring for the patient, because remotely you are guiding whoever is there to take care of the patient there. So there is a optimization of resource utilization, and you could minimize. And this paper does emphasize that they could significantly minimize the usage of personal protective equipment. And what this paper also elucidates is patients feel very lonely when they are in COVID isolation. So the audio visual aids were used for the family to continuously communicate with the family and continuously communicate with nurses. That patient, even the patient could communicate in a real time with the off-site nurse continuously if he had any queries, because if the on-site nurse is busy, then the patient had an ability to use audiovisual aids to communicate with a off-site nurse about any concerns or queries he had. And emotional support was provided using audiovisual aids by counselors and psychologists. And even spiritual healing was provided by chaplains, since this happened in US. So spiritual help was provided by chaplains using audiovisual aids, and even social workers used utilize these audiovisual aids to take care of their social welfare needs with the patients. So I think so. What really this emphasizes is all the dimensions of a holistic care to a patient could be attained by using audiovisual aids, which was innovative in this COVID scenario, which typically doesn't happen in a conventional tele ICU. Here they could incorporate audiovisual aids to facilitate all these other dimensions of care to the patient with COVID. So it was just a one page editorial. So that is the essence, whatever I've said about that in relation to COVID. So now the question is what we have been doing for our state. So as you know, the Columbia Asia Hospital and another hospital uh, have been tied up with government to do tele rounds for Karnataka districts, and Columbia Asia we are doing tele rounds for 11 districts. So if this is the map, so we were given the responsibility to handhold for 11 districts and incorporate all the ethos of telescience into this district, whatever I have spoken. So which are all the districts we are covering? So basically, we have covered 11 districts for 4 weeks, and there have been, luckily I would say, this is with God's grace and whatever little interventions we may have done, with God's grace there has been no deaths in any of the 11 districts so far in the 4 weeks, and we have looked after close to 240 COVID-19. I wouldn't say looked after, we have overseen the care of 240 COVID-19 patients in 11 districts. So let's talk about Hubli. So the Hubli district, so the first one is the COVID. So we had around 22 COVID patients and 154 SARI patients, and there were 16 males and 80 male patients with SARI, 6 female patients COVID, and 74 SARI. So here we had and all the data we stratified as per the age. So more than 50, there were 4 patients out of 22, and 105 in SARI patients. So I'll just highlight one of the challenging case that we had where possible multidisciplinary team approach and our inputs may have influenced a good outcome in this complicated patient. So there was this 21-year-old female with a 20 weeks gestation who had a severe COVID with multi-organ failure. So what did she have? She had septic shock with multi-organ dysfunction. She had acute kidney injury, and her creat was cascading up or trending up. It had gone up to 3.9 at one stage. She had low platelets and she had a falling hemoglobin with low platelets, and she was in altered sensorium and with hyponatremia. She had metabolic complication and she was on vasopressor support, and she had all the alarm markers of COVID, very high ferritin and D-dimers was more than 10,000, LDH was high, CRP. So this was a very difficult situation for us because she's a young lady who is 20 weeks gestation, 20 plus weeks gestation with septic shock. And we followed the trends very closely, and we could see that acute kidney injury was only worsening. It started with creatinine of 2, it was inching up to 3.5, 3.6. And there was a smoldering DIC picture with platelets falling down, with HB coming down, needing transfusion. So we had to make a difficult decision of terminating the pregnancy. Obviously, we gave all the protocolized therapy for COVID we have created for the state. So we followed the protocol for high risk COVID patients, and all the medications were administered. But the key interventions that we could talk on is we engaged the multidisciplinary team approach. We engaged the physicians there, we engaged the obstetric team there, we engaged the nephrologist team there, and we engaged our nephrologist team here, our physician team. So together we made a consensual decision that termination in pregnancy is something that we need to do to save the mother's life. And we terminated the pregnancy, and with God's grace, post termination, all her parameters improved. She significantly improved, sensorium improved, platelets stabilized, and we weaned her off the vasopressors. And now she's shifted out of ICU to HDU to the ward, and she's mobilizing. She's only waiting for her COVID to become negative to be discharged because 14 days is over. So that's a good intervention. So I would give this credit to the local team. The reason is we set up the multidisciplinary team and we were constantly in touch with the local team, and local team uh, were very cooperative and very forthcoming in decision making or engaging in the decision making in this Hubli. So all the credit goes to the local team which engaged with us, and this consensual multidisciplinary team decision could be made to save a valuable life of COVID. So we are covering Mandya district where we had 36 COVID patients, 28 SARI, and more than 50 years we had three patients. So in Mandya we had a one SARI patient which was complicated. She was a retroviral HIV lady who came with severe acute respiratory infection with pancytopenia. She came with HB of 3 or 4 with short of breath and CD4 less than 100. So this was a difficult situation to determine the choice of antibiotics, and obviously we rationalized all that and she stabilized and she's even discharged. So again, all the interventions adhering to the sound principles of intensive care was applied to this patient. So I won't go into the details what all we did, but I'm just telling the variety or the spectrum of patients that we have managed. So Chamrajnagar is a green zone. We have had only 9 SARI patients, more than 50 was 5 patients, 6 were males. So we had one patient SARI with acute kidney injury where there was intervention with regards to fluid responsiveness that we did, and creatinine normalized because creatinine was trending up, which nicely improved with fluid responsiveness strategy that we sort of incorporated or imparted to the local team there. And the Hassan was a green zone until few days back. It became a red zone with 16 COVID patients, and all of them are young patients. They're all doing well. So Tumkur was one area. What we could make out in Tumkur is the COVID load was low, but the SARI load was very, very high, and we had very sick patients of SARI coming in. So obviously our role was very much there in trying to optimize some of this SARI with incorporation of protocols. So Bagalkot is another hot zone where we had 55 COVID patients, 20 SARI, more than 50 was 8. So as I'm speaking, we have this patient with ARDS, as you see, 55-year-old male with ARDS with an X-ray of this nature with low platelets with AKI. So he's a sick patient who's had an old history of tuberculosis. Now he has ARDS with low platelets and AKI. So he's in sepsis with COVID with sepsis. So right now he's on high flow nasal cannula in Bagalkot. So Bagalkot doctors are excellent. So they have aligned with all the thought processes that we incorporate or we impart. And we are hoping and praying. And I've seen the repeat X-ray today. It's gotten significantly better. So we are hoping that he'll turn around the corner. And he's on a COVID-19 state protocol management. And Chikbalapur, again, we have around 19 COVID, 5 SARI. So this was an interesting case. So there was a family with the father who is a COVID, who is asymptomatic, but his D-dimer was very high. So we put him on prophylactic anticoagulation, prophylactic enoxaparin. So this is the X-ray of the son, who weighs 130 kilos, and constantly we are told he's walking around, he's asymptomatic, but we got an X-ray, and this is a typical silent hypoxemia. So he's an obese guy, 130 kilos, who is happily walking around, but you have an X-ray which manifests like this. So now we put our calculator, and he comes in a medium risk. So we have put him on at least DVT prophylaxis, and he's on COVID treatment protocol. And we have told the team to very closely monitor his saturation on a continuous mode. Right now he's maintaining saturation on room air with this X-ray. But we have kept them guarded that this is a guy who can tend to down spiral. So basically we are picking up the cues very early on, and for him the alarm markers of D-dimer, ferritin, LDH has all been sent, and I think we are awaiting today. So this was the X-ray done yesterday. So again, an interesting case where people are walking around, but when you do an X-ray you see something like this. So Ballari we had 11 COVID patients, more than 52, and Koppal is still a green zone. We had 3 SARI as of now. So Mysore, I think this number is wrong. We had around 50 odd patients. So I got the data only today. So, and no deaths in Mysore. So in Mysore, we had in fact a very sick patient, 72-year-old male with ARDS with multi-organ dysfunction, AKI, low platelets with obtundation with hypotension. So this is one guy. There was no HFNC available because it was a new district hospital. So we managed him on NIV. He's come out of NIV, became COVID negative, and discharged from the district hospital. So this was another patient. So this is Uttar Karnataka. That is again green zone. So we do not have any hot cases. So that's our Karnataka state statistics, which I am just suggesting. So here, what I wish to say is this is not conventional tele ICU that I have given it as a narrative that we are doing. We are doing tele rounds. So what we have done is tele rounds is sort of a detailed handover that we typically do in ICU. There is a constant sharing of information. So we are using a Zoom platform alongst with the audiovisual aids, alongst with WhatsApp and other means to integrate the clinical information, monitored variables, and uh, investigative modalities. So we are doing twice daily. So there is a detailed sort of a overview of all these patients. So basically, once we go to each district, we prioritize. So obviously, at the outset, we focus on patients who are on oxygenation, who are very stable. We'll just touch base very briefly, and then we move on. So it takes roughly around 4 hours to do morning and evening rounds for these 11 districts, and more districts are being considered for telework for different hospitals. So far it has been good, is what we feel, because we have incorporated all the protocols. We are re-emphasizing there is an additional eyes, and they also need help in trying to understand certain interventions that has to be adopted at certain times, especially in the sick patients. So I would call this as a tele rounds. I would call this as an innovative way our honorable government has adopted, which seem to be reaping benefits from the statistics which we follow. So I need to acknowledge our honorable government of Karnataka. So I would proudly say this is the first public-private sort of a partnership that has happened in India with regards to tele rounds. This is the first state which has adopted this concept. So we are also equally enthusiastic to work with our honorable government, our Honorable Medical Education Minister, Honorable Health Commissioner, and Honorable Additional Chief Secretary who are involved. And he's a Chief Nodal Officer, he's an IAS officer, Dr. Trilok Chandra, who is putting a lot of effort, hard work, he's coordinating. Uh, he's literally there for every tele round of our two hospitals in Bangalore are involved. So there is a command center which is entirely set up for this telework, and this works round the clock. And Dr. Trilok Chandra is really coordinating it well between the district hospitals and our hospitals, and we reach out to him for any help we need with regards to communicating certain interventions or procuring certain equipments or procuring drugs. So I would applaud his efforts. He's putting yeoman efforts into this whole tele ICU as a chief nodal officer for whole of Karnataka. So my immense thanks and gratitude to all the district hospital doctors. And you have heard me time and again telling that excellent rapport and getting them to align with our thought process or getting synced with our wavelengths is quintessential for the success of these tele rounds. Because if there is no rapport that is established with district hospital doctors, then there's nothing that we can achieve. So all my salutations go to this district. They are the true COVID warriors. They are putting all the efforts. We are only guiding them from outside, but they're extremely forthcoming. And all the communication, I have to emphasize, doesn't end with tele rounds. Even post tele rounds, we are constantly communicating through WhatsApp or to other audiovisual meets with regards to exchange of X-rays, X-ray follow-up of investigations. And I'm told Dr. Trilok and the honorable government is working on an interface where we get real-time sharing of images and real-time sharing of investigation. If that happens, that is a one step forward for our tele rounds that will happen, and which will definitely help our patients and improve their outcomes. And last but not the least, thank our whole Columbia Asia organization, our chairman, Dr. Nandakumar Jairam, our general manager in Columbia Asia, and our ICU team, my colleague Dr. Karthik, two physicians, Santosh, Srividya, our nephrologist, Dr. Deepak, or two anesthesiologists who all form the team of tele-ICU, Dr. Sajana and Dr. Deepak. So all of them, we work together as one unit and putting in our committed efforts to see what best can be done for our state. So thank you very much. So hopefully that answers many questions that would be lingering in one's mind as to what exactly we are doing in tele rounds. I'm not using the word tele ICU. What we are doing is tele rounds, so that we have a little differential sort of an approach. But it is getting better. So this would hopefully move forward to a next step in having that interface. And once that interface moves into continuous monitoring, it would then I would be more than happy to call it as a tele ICU. So thank you very much. So you can visit my website www.drpradeeprangappa.com to rehear to this lecture if you have any doubts or if you need to rehear. Thank you.